Pages. Before creating a page, we have to take into account who's going to use the options that we're going to display on this page. If there's an option that's hardly ever used, we're going to want to hide it a little bit, or maybe it's going to occupy that space. If it's a very commonly used option, we're going to want to highlight it, or we're going to want to dedicate more space to that option. So we have to evaluate the user's experience, the complexity or the simplicity of the page. And this obviously should depend on the type of user who's going to be interacting with the page that we're designing. It's not the same to create a portal for a stockbroker than for a normal online bank user. We also have to try to not distract or add unnecessary things to the page. Sometimes we think it's going to look nicer if we add a whole bunch of contents to the page, but it's important to keep things simple. White space doesn't hurt. It's better not to add a whole bunch of images, icons, a whole bunch of design. Sometimes it's just better to add a couple links or very little information, or only the information that the user really needs. The first thing we're going to do when we create a page is divide it into different spaces. This is something you guys have already been doing because it's exactly the same as the portals. But anyways, basically you create some sections, and in each section you can create one or more spaces. And after that, in each space, we have to add some contents. Most of the times when we're creating a page, we're going to have little content, or maybe we're not going to have that much content. And little by little, as we need more and more content, we can start adding features to our page. This would be an example of all these spaces with content. So I've added 4 spaces here at the top. We can see these are the 4 spaces. Afterwards, I've added a report, then some access to some families, and so on. And this basically would be the result of my page. So the first thing I have to do is create some sections. Once I've created these sections, in this case I've created 5 sections, I'm going to decide how many spaces I want. And then in each space, I'm going to start adding the contents. This is key. This is the basic thing that we need to know in order to create a page. Afterwards, we're just going to learn how to create the different contents, but creating a page is quite easily. All we have to do is divide the screen into different spaces, and then we're going to add those contents. Here we can see that each one of these spaces is going to have an ID or a number related to that space. In this case, in this scenario, we have 12 spaces. Here we can see all the spaces that are in section 1, they're always going to have a 1 in front, and then another correlative number, and the same thing happens with all the rest. Here, for example, the spaces that are in the section 5 have a 5 in front, and here we have 5.1, 5.2, and so on. Another thing we have to take into account is that we can indicate on what side of the screen do we want our page to appear. So there's an option when we enter the configuration of the page in the first tab that's called General, where we can indicate if we want the page to appear at the left, at the center, at the right. But it is true that this option doesn't affect, or it doesn't really work if we have a responsive site, because when we have a responsive site, what we're doing is we're taking advantage of the entire screen of the user. So when we're using the entire screen, this option wouldn't apply. The next thing I'm going to do is enter the application and show you guys how I'm going to create a page. In order to do that, I go to Structure, I enter Pages, and here I click on Create a New Page. Here you can see an example of a page that's already created. We have the first tab. Here's where we indicate the position. Remember, it's only going to affect if we actually have a page with a fixed size. If it's responsive, it's not gonna work. Now here we have the background style, the background of the browser. We have some other design options for the entire page. If we go to the tree view, we're going to be able to see all the contents displayed on a tree view. If we go to the layout view, we're going to see, well, these views are very similar to what we've already seen for the portal. So we're going to see all the sections, and in each section, we're going to see the different spaces. Personally, I like to work with this view better than the other ones. Here we have an editing view. This is basically what you see is what you get. So you can see all the sections with their contents already displayed. And then there's a grouped editing view where you can see all the spaces. Basically, it's a list where you can configure one after each other. Anyways, for me, this is the most comfortable view. Here, I'd also like to remind you that we can import the configuration to each one of these spaces. So let's say I want to add some content here that I'm already using in some other page. Well, I'll click here on import, and I'll import the configuration to this space. If I want to import an entire page, all I have to do is click up here on import view, and I could import the configuration, copy the configuration of another page. I can also click on go to the page. This takes me to the page. I can also go to general, and I could copy the link of this page. So if I copy this and I add it to a button or I send it via email, well, anyone would be able to access this page as long as they have permissions, of course. If I assign employees, they're going to have direct access to this page because it's the one I assigned to them. If not, they're either going to want to see the one in structure, the one that has been defined in structure in general, that's an option we already saw before, or the option that they've selected in their record. Okay, so I'm going to create one from scratch. So I'm going to click on create. I'm going to give it a name. I'll click continue. And now I'll enter this first section. If I want it to be responsive, I'll have to click here. I'll have to indicate that I want it to be automatic according to the resolution. Besides, I could indicate that I want my contents to be repositioned based on the size of the screen. I could also indicate that I want my content to be collapsed. Here would be the configuration, and I'll show you guys an example. All we have to do is add this little button here that collapses the content. So basically, each section that I'm creating on a page could be collapsed. And here in the configuration, we can indicate, do we want it to be collapsible, yes or no? Do we want the initial status of that section to be collapsed or expanded? And here we indicate the color of the button, the collapse height, the position, and so on. I'm not going to collapse it, so I'm just going to create a responsive section. And now here I'm going to start creating my content. For example, let's say this is my HTML I'll save and exit. And I want to create a new space. This is basically what we've already been doing all this time. So I'll click here on create a new space. I can create it to the left, above, below. Let's say I'm going to create it to the right, and I'll call it HTML-B. So there we go. Now I have two spaces. Obviously here, if I'm saying that this is 100% and this is 100%, it would be the same as saying 50% and 50%. But anyways, I like to do things correctly, so I'm going to indicate the correct size here. Now I could add another section below. I could click here. I'd click on create a new section below. And the next section could be fixed or automatic. It could be collapsible, whatever I prefer. So now I have another section, and we'd continue to do this until we have all of our sections created. Once we've created all the sections, we're going to want to divide them into spaces.